I think we need to start. There is some difficulty insofar as getting connected to the link is concerned, but nevertheless, we can't wait indefinitely. But I would like to welcome those who are present actually to this webinar on emerging geopolitical trends in South Asia on behalf of the Islamabad Center for Regional Studies. Actually, when this webinar was conceived, the situation was more or less different. But today's discussion is taking place in the backdrop of rapidly evolving geopolitical situation, at the heart of which is Eurasia. The new environment so created has a strong bearing on South Asia's political and strategic landscape. The impact has both geopolitical and geoeconomic dimensions, further dampening the prospects for recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Moreover, the Russia-Ukraine crisis has posed policy uh, uh, policy dilemmas for the South Asian countries. Their policy choices are constrained and determined by several political, economic, and security considerations. Most of these countries rely on imports of critical defense equipment and technologies as well as energy and food commodities from various outside sources. For example, India has historically relied on Russian arms and technology, accounting for almost 85% of these imports. New Delhi's initiatives for diversifying its sources include its strategic partnership with the United States, posing, in the current scenario, hard policy options. Similarly, India is the third largest importer of energy worldwide. The Western economic and financial sanctions have now been strengthened by the United States, sanctions on Russian energy exports, which has though somewhat diluted the unified Western stance on the issue. Russia continues to consolidate its position in Ukraine. It has remained firm on its strategic security objectives within the Western security parameters. Any outcome short of regime change in Ukraine or security guarantees on Russian terms seems unlikely at this stage. Given some of these factors, India's position, especially in the United Nations and its bodies, is precarious. The balancing between the West and Russia may become unsustainable as the United States pressure intensifies on countries like India and Pakistan to take a clear stance or face some consequences. China's position and stature has enhanced as a global player. Its role in finding a solution through diplomacy, dialogue, and negotiations has earned recognition to China. Beijing's comprehensive strategic partnership with Russia and its vital interest in promoting peace, development, and growth in the developing countries through BRI makes it a natural interlocutor in the crisis. On 7th March, China's foreign minister expressed views on some of the foreign policy and security issues. His comment on proactively pursuing the BRICS institution is notable, especially in the era of the realignments that are taking place. But I think Turkey apparently is playing a major role in getting the two foreign ministers, the Russian and the Ukrainian foreign ministers, meet during a conference that is being held in Turkey. Regional and international attention cannot be taken away from the crucial question of peace and stability in Afghanistan and Kabul's capacity and resolve to rein in the terrorist elements during diluting Afghan commitment to not allow its soil to be used by groups like TTP and ISK. For Pakistan, such elements pose a critical challenge and existential threat. Regional consensus on this demand must remain unwavering, and Kabul government needs to assume responsibility in this regard. We have an excellent panel of experienced and outstanding ambassadors who have first-hand experience of having served in the important regional capitals. They will make their presentations, which will be followed by question answer or discussion session. You may either ask a question and by making an intervention, or send questions in the chat box. So I would like to invite if Ambassador Khalid Masood is there to share.
He is not there. He is not there. He is not here.
So can I invite you, Basit, then?
Let's start with Ambassador Syed Abrar Hussain.
So you want to start with him?
Yes, he's our guest.
He's our guest, okay. I will now request Ambassador Abrar Hussain to share his views on Afghanistan and future geopolitical developments in the region. He has served as Pakistan's ambassador to Nepal and Afghanistan. He is also actively participating in several discussions on Afghanistan and has written his memoirs of his tenure in Kabul. And of course, he was also there in Nepal, where I have served, and he was doing an excellent work there as well.
Thank you. Well, let me immediately start with the Afghanistan's significance as heart of Asia. We all know what Iqbal said, that if there is peace and stability in Afghanistan, the whole region will benefit. And in case there is instability, there is violence, there are wars in Afghanistan, the whole region will suffer. So with this description of Afghanistan, let's see how it's going to have impact on the region in near future and how it can affect the geopolitical developments in the region. Well, currently, we all know the situation in Afghanistan. There is a Taliban government. They are facing political and economic challenges. There is a humanitarian crisis. But at the same time, the world has not recognized Taliban government. The world is asking for an inclusive government. They are demanding for actions about human rights and especially rights for women. But what are the options available to us and the world at large? In Afghanistan right now, I can say that there are three possibilities. Number one, that Taliban agree to the world demand and form an inclusive government. Number two, that their government is overthrown by some group within Afghanistan. And number three, that they continue with the existing system. In fact, the situation right now indicates that the first two possibilities are not available to us right now. They are not probable. There's not even a remote possibility that Taliban will be overthrown in near future. And now what Taliban have done so far, they have brought peace to the whole country for the first time in more than 40 years. So now there is a need to help them in bringing political and economic stability to their country. This will have a positive impact throughout the region. A peaceful and stable Afghanistan will be a transit hub. It will connect Central Asia and Russia to South Asia, Middle East, and rest of the world. Regional projects such as TAPI and CASA 1000 and rail and road connections would be possible only if there is peace in Afghanistan. Now the world's demands are there. Yes, as I said, they want an inclusive government, human rights, women's rights. And Taliban have in fact not outrightly rejected any of these demands. They've softened their rhetoric this time, and they have been saying that they are serious about meeting these demands. They say they are ready to open girls' schools and colleges. They are ready to allow them to come to their jobs. And they are also caring about human rights. But now they need to be engaged because they need time and money to improve things. We all know that their assets were frozen by the US. And then recently, President Joe Biden made an announcement which was very unjust, where half of that amount was to be spent within America by compensating the victims of the 9/11. So let's see if uh, we can achieve our targets, or the world can achieve whatever it's saying by putting sanctions on Taliban and by isolating them. There are already UN sanctions, US sanctions, which the US in fact promised to remove while they were doing Doha Agreement. In Doha Agreement, certain dates were given when US would remove its sanctions, and then US would make efforts and try to get removed the UN sanctions as well. But unfortunately, all those timelines were not met, and there is not even an indication that the Americans or the West is going to remove those sanctions against Taliban, because these sanctions are making Afghan people suffer. Because of them, there's a humanitarian crisis looming. Because of those sanctions, economic problems within Afghanistan. So let's consider it that whether by putting these sanctions, the world has ever been able to achieve its targets in the world. So uh, now there is a need to reconsider all these things and see if we can't get the desired results through isolation and through sanctions. Then we should move forward, because the Taliban need international support and assistance to curb violence and fight terrorist groups based on their soil for so many decades. They say they want to fight all these groups, but then they would need help from the world, from international community. And if this world, especially our region, understands the importance of peace in Afghanistan, then they should avoid any such action which once again weakens the political system in Afghanistan and leads to a chaos there. Well, I'll stop here, and we'll discuss if there are any other questions in question answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Abrar Hussain. I think you made some very important points, emphasizing that Afghanistan is the heart of Asia, and quoting Iqbal, the three scenarios that you basically outlined. The third, I think, as you have pointed out, continuation of the regime is important. Incidentally, President Hamid Karzai was on CGTN. He was being interviewed, in which he mentioned about the assets which are frozen in the United States, and he said that that money is not to be used for any other purpose but to strengthen the reserves in the Central Bank of Afghanistan. So I think there are some difficulties which hopefully internally and externally will be overcome, and money will flow into Afghanistan so that people can then benefit from whatever programs are going to be launched in the country. There is humanitarian crisis, and it's fortunate that the girls and women are being now allowed to go to school, and there are promises by the Taliban government that they will basically respect human rights and try and meet some of the demands that have been put by the international community about inclusive and representative government. With this, I think I'm going to now request, we will have question and answer session, hopefully, and request Ambassador Abdul Basit, who is also Director General of ICRS, He has served as Pakistan's ambassador to Germany and High Commissioner to India. He's very active on social, national, and international media, and regularly participates in stimulating discussions. He was to speak on the domestic environment in India. He's free to do that if he feels like it. But now perhaps he can also include the prevailing circumstances and how is that going to affect India's stand in terms of foreign policy and security issues. So over to you, Basis.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, ma'am. Very kind of you. And it's a pleasure to be once again on a webinar being organized by the Islamabad Center for Regional Studies, ICRS. Very briefly, I would touch upon a few important points in the context of India's domestic politics and how it is impacting our region. Today is a very important day in India because election results are being announced, which were held during the last 1 month in 5 states, particularly in Uttar Pradesh. And Uttar Pradesh, as you all know, is the largest Indian state, over 200 million people. And earlier indications suggest that BJP is going to be re-elected there. Similarly, in Uttarakhand and Manipur and Goa, it seems that BJP will be elected, but in Punjab, in eastern Punjab, the situation seems rather very interesting because it seems that Aam Aadmi Party has made interesting grounds they made, and they are going to win in Punjab at the cost of the Congress Party as well as the BJP Akali Dal. Be that as it may, we all know that about the origin of the RSS, and very interestingly, they realized as very early on that in order to implement their Hindutva agenda, it is absolutely imperative for them to get power, both at the center and in important states in particular. And they have been working since last many decades towards this objective. And we all know that how the Babri Masjid was demolished on 6 December 1992. Then Gujarat massacres took place on the watch of then Chief Minister of Gujarat, Mr. Narendra Modi. So they have kind of, over the decades, they have mastered the technique of winning elections. And I was in India during the elections in 2014 when the candidate Narendra Modi was presented to India as their prime ministerial candidate. And he was projected as a person who would never compromise on principles, and he would aggressively pursue the domestic agenda as well as the foreign policy agenda. So this is what it is all about, because RSS and BJP, they are deeply ideologically entrenched organizations. So hence, there is very little space and room for them to make compromises. They would like to dictate their terms. And this has been the case, if we see during the last 7-8 years since Prime Minister Modi took over. This is how they have been running the show. In 2000, since Prime Minister Modi took over, the BJP came into power, we have seen in India itself how mob lynching of Muslims took place at the hands of cow vigilantes. Then we have seen programs like Ghar Wapsi and Love Jihad. And there has been a kind of pattern against minorities, particularly against Muslims and Christians. Then secondly, we have seen the National Register of Citizens, how they would like to disenfranchise or make about 2 million people living only in Assam as stateless. Then we have seen the Citizenship Amendment Act as well, which was anti-Muslim, anti-Christian, and so this is all continuing. So because the RSS, we all know, and the BJP, we all know, they have a blinkered worldview, they have a skewed and self-serving interest, and they operate according to their ideological contours. And inevitably, that has affected the region as a whole. You would all remember how India even imposed an economic blockade on a country, landlocked country like Nepal in September 2015, and that blockade continued for about 4 months. Only because of the reason that the government of Nepal wanted to bring about some changes in the constitution, and the Indians wanted a prominent role for an Indian tribe, Madheshi, which is on the border between Pakistan, Nepal, and India. So their interference was very clear in the internal affairs of Nepal. Then secondly, we all know that again in 2015, how India crossed into the territory of Myanmar in order to carry out some military operations against insurgents there. And then even between Pakistan and India, we had seen that India staged a drama of surgical strikes in 2016. Then again, in order to pursue their interests blindly vis-a-vis Pakistan, they went to the extent of breaching Pakistan's or violating Pakistan's airspace. And we all know what happened over Balakot on 26 February 2019. And then Pakistan had to retaliate. So the point which I'm trying to emphasize is that the BJP is a dangerous phenomenon, not only for the country itself, because it has turned India into a majoritarian system, and it has been challenging its secular foundations. And that is the biggest problem. And then we all know that minorities in India are not in very small numbers. Only Muslim constitute for about 200 million people. So India is domestically, obviously, India under the BJP is facing many strains, stresses, but that is also being reflected on its foreign policy, especially in the region. We have seen how India blatantly stripped the occupied Jammu and Kashmir of its special status, not only against its own constitution, against the ruling of the Indian Supreme Court, but also against international law and the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. So that shows the mindset of the BJP and the RSS, that they are not into for compromises or to entering into reasonable negotiations and work out modus vivendi on the basis of quid pro quo. They simply want to navigate through these issues and dictate their terms and impose unilateral decisions on others, whether it is in the context of domestic issues. We have seen how they came up about a law against Indian farmers, and there were strikes for over 1 year in which hundreds of people were killed. And that's why they're losing in Punjab, the BJP, and both the Congress and the BJP are losing, apparently have lost in Punjab, and the Aam Aadmi Party has made considerable gains there. So the BJP is definitely, its policies, domestic policies are ideologically driven, and that in turn, their policies are also affecting, or their outlook, their worldview is also affecting the region as a whole, because they would like the regional countries like Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka to toe their lines, to toe their dictation, and that is where the problem lies. because we are all sovereign countries. We do have problems with India. All majority of the neighboring countries do have problems with India. Even China. We have seen how in 2017 India had skirmishes at Donglong, which is a tri-junction between Bhutan, India, and China. And then recently, last year, there were skirmishes in eastern Ladakh in which 20 Indian soldiers were killed. So India, I think under the BJP, is a country, it has become a country which is finding it difficult, very difficult to first to get to grips with its own domestic issues, and then how to go about its problems with its neighboring countries, particularly, I would say, with Pakistan and China. And then, as the president of ICRS very rightly pointed out, that India would also at some stage find it very difficult to keep maintaining this balance between its interest in the region, particularly vis-a-vis Russia, its interest in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and its strategic, evolving strategic partnership with the US, because these two things are poles apart. And at one point, and India is already feeling the pressure, because you cannot have your cake and eat it too. The point will come when India will feel the pressure and will have to take decisions. And I think the West fully realizes that they cannot fully rely on this particular regime, which is headed by Prime Minister Modi. But the fact of the matter is, and the irony of the fact is that we will have to deal with this dispensation with India, because I do not see as to how the BJP, under the given obtaining circumstances, be removed from power. The next elections are scheduled in 2024, and before that, we all know Ram Mandir will be inaugurated next year in Ayodhya, where at the site where Babri Masjid existed. So they're all set to win the elections even in 2024. So we will have to deal with this, and I think because of this particular mindset, we are also not seeing, it has become the major impediment to regional connectivity, regional integration, and regional cooperation as well. Because unless there is some movement forward between Pakistan and India, there is simply no possibility that this region can revive or restore this South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. And India seems to be the biggest impediment under the BJP. And I think we will have to live with this, and perhaps devise ways, improvise ways and means as to other regional countries can come together. Because, you know, it is very clear that the BJP, they are the votaries of the Kautilyan philosophy. And Kautilya, we all know, is far more lethal when it comes to dealing with the neighboring countries, and especially with hostile countries. And that's why we have seen how India also destabilized Afghanistan, and through Afghanistan tried to destabilize Pakistan. So we will have this constant threat from India under the BJP in particular, that they will continue to be hitting Pakistan economically through Gwadar in Balochistan. Recently we have seen a bomb blast again, suicide blast in Peshawar by some Baloch. Nobody has accepted, but we all know who are the foot soldiers and who are the masterminds. We all know we arrested Commander Kulbhushan Jadhav, and he was sentenced to death. So there is enough evidence of India's involvement, not only in Pakistan, but in other regional countries as well, in other neighboring countries as well. The history is rather very, very kind of stark when it comes to India's involvement in the region. So I think it is high time that the other regional countries get together and see as to how we can join hands against India's blatant policies domestic, because domestically too, if there is mayhem taking place against Indian Muslims, Pakistan is legally committed under the 1950 Liaquat Nehru Pact to raise its voice against if anything goes wrong against the minorities there. So Pakistan is in a very difficult situation, I think, at the moment because of India's very, I would say, hidebound attitude towards not only Pakistan, but Kashmir obviously is one other issue, then other neighboring countries as well. So things do not really augur well for this region so long as the BJP is in power. And I do not see India getting rid of, they do not have, Indians are now caught in a situation where they do not have any other option but to continue voting for the BJP. At least 30-35% people who vote for the BJP, and this is what the BJP needs. And it has, as I said at the very outset, the BJP has mastered the electoral politics, in the sense that how to win elections by dividing other parties. Congress is nowhere. We do not see Congress anywhere. It has been trounced in the recent elections now. And then there are regional parties which do not really make much difference, like Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal, or in Bihar we see Mr. Tish Kumar. So all these regional parties are of no consequence in my view. So the BJP is having a free hand. And let's hope that the people of India at the end of the day realize as to where their country is being pushed. Its secular foundations are being weakened by the BJP, and it has, for all practical purposes, has become a Hindu Rashtra, at least for now. Whether or not at some later stage the people of India get rid of the BJP, that is a million-dollar question. But I think the BJP, the way it functions, still has a bright future in terms of elections. But India as a whole and this region as a whole will continue to suffer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Abdul Basit. I think it was a very detailed, comprehensive analysis of the domestic politics in India. And I think you have painted a very bleak picture in terms of any change taking place in the politics of India, with BJP continue to rule even after the next elections. The worrying thing is that Mr. Yogi Adityanath is being projected as the next successor of Prime Minister Modi. So that also does not augur well for the future relations of India with the neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan. So I think external relations obviously are going to get affected, and India has always been emphasizing that it would like to continue with its strategic autonomy, but that strategic autonomy in terms of foreign relations is coming under stress and strain. The other important aspect of the whole dimension is that even during the time of Congress, when Congress was ruling, you could discern a kind of ideological bent and a desire to project India as a regional hegemon or a country that is regionally strong, and other neighboring countries should basically succumb to the Indian pressures. So my question to you would be, Mr. Basit, would that make any difference if other parties like Aam Aadmi and regional parties, can they really bring about some sort of change in the mindset of BJP or the ruling party?
I think it's a pertinent question, but I think the regional parties, including the Congress party, which used to be the mainstream party, They have not been able to come up because Mamata Banerjee did try after winning the elections in West Bengal. She did try to bring all the opposition parties and regional parties together. But then, I mean, they are still not there. And I doubt very much because it would be very difficult for these parties to agree on a particular candidate as to who would be their prime ministerial candidate. And there are many, I mean, there are huge differences when it comes to that. But it is very interesting that, the Congress party, the BJP started with this, that they will Congress Bharat, that India without Congress. And it seems to me that they have been gradually succeeding in this long-term objective. I was shocked to see the results, in the Punjab today, the way the indications are, and also in Goa. So it is very surprising that how the Congress party, which had ruled India for so many decades, had lost ground totally to the BJP and to some regional parties. So I doubt very much that the Congress, the regional parties would be able, or even for that matter, Aam Aadmi Party would be able to put up a joint resistance or joint opposition to the BJP, because the BJP, they would come up with some machinations that these parties never get together or unite against them. And we will see many a chasm among these parties. And my feeling is, and my assessment is, that the BJP would not have a very strong opposition when India goes to elections in 2024. So we will have to live with the BJP for some more years to come, unless their economic policies totally fail and they're not able to deliver economically. Then obviously corporate sector will start supporting other parties. But as of today, I think economically India is not doing as bad. It is doing reasonably well. Their growth rate is quite good, and the corporate India, as for today, is also standing totally behind the BJP.
Thank you for that answer. But is Ambassador Abrar Hussain still connected?
I think he is with us.
He's with us. Okay.
Yes, I think so.
I'm here. Yes.
Okay.
May I ask a question, Mr. I have a question for Mr. Ambassador Abrar Hussain.
Yes, please.
May I, Madam President?
Please go ahead, and then maybe later.
Ambassador Hussain, I just wanted to understand, because we lost the initial period, because when Taliban took over on the 15th of August, that was perhaps was the time for countries like Pakistan and China to go ahead and recognize the Taliban government. Now that the world is focused on Ukraine-Russia crisis, do you think there is any possibility for countries like Pakistan and China or Iran, and for that matter, Russia, to come together and move in this direction of recognizing the Taliban government? Do you see that happening, or do you think now it's a lost case?
Well, I think it can work both ways. Now that the world is busy with the Ukraine crisis, maybe the regional countries, especially Pakistan, Iran, China, go ahead and recognize Taliban, because the whole attention right now is towards Ukraine and not towards our region. So that's an opportunity as well. But at the same time, as we say that the whole world is looking towards Ukraine and no one is giving any attention to Afghanistan. So I think for recognition, you don't necessarily need their attention. For humanitarian aid and for other such things, yes. But for recognition, in a way, it's better that the world is, those who are opposing the recognition, especially those countries, The West is looking towards Ukraine, and they don't have their attention towards Afghanistan right now. So I'll say that it can be an opportunity also, but then again, it shouldn't be only Pakistan. There should be some other countries who join us, like Pakistan, Iran, China, some of us together. I mean, at least there should be 2-3 countries who, one after another or together, announce this recognition.
Thank you.
Actually, my question is also related to regional connectivity. Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, and also I think recently Pakistan, they have laid a lot of emphasis on getting land connected through some infrastructure development, and I think some convoys carrying goods from Uzbekistan has come to Pakistan as well, using Afghanistan as the corridor. And of course, Uzbek president was also visiting Pakistan, and a number of agreements have been signed. So my question is that how much do you think that this possibility of using the opportunity, as you said, while the world is focused on Ukraine, how much that is going to be helpful in us moving forward in the economic field and getting regionally connected? Is there a lot of possibility of that? Because you did mention about Gaza and so on and so forth. So what is the prospect of all these connectivity projects?
Well, in fact, this connectivity between Central Asia and South Asia depends, number one, on peace in Afghanistan, as I said. But then number two, it also depends on the relationship between Afghanistan and the Central Asian countries. Unfortunately, right now, the relationship between Afghanistan and its Central Asian neighbors is not very ideal. The Afghan defense minister spoke against Tajikistan and Uzbekistan while demanding the return of their aircrafts from those countries. And then there was a reaction also. Tajikistan is also not very happy because they want that Tajiks in Afghanistan should be given a proper share in government. And thirdly, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan have problems with their Islamist movements, many of whom are based in Afghanistan, like Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. And in case of Tajikistan, there is a militant group which is called Ansarullah. So Tajikistan has been blaming the Taliban government that they have placed some of Ansarullah people on the Tajik border. So if this is the situation, perhaps these problems will surface again and again when we are talking about connectivity. Although the normalization can take place, for example, the Central Asian countries are giving electricity to Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and they have not stopped that electricity despite the fact that the Taliban government is not able to make the payments. So even without payment, they are continuing with providing that electricity to Afghanistan. So, I mean, the situation is not very good, but it's not very bad either. And we can go on with our efforts for regional connectivity, and perhaps it should gain some momentum.
Okay, thank you. My next question would be, unless Ambassador Basit or someone else has a question for the panelists. If none, then
I would have a question for you, ma'am, because you have served in Poland, and Poland wanted to send its aircraft to Ukraine in the defense of Ukrainian people and Ukrainian government. So how you look at the evolving situation? Where will it end? Given the fact that now, I mean, both sides have taken maximalist positions, the Russian side and the Ukrainian president as well. So where do you see this whole crisis ending? I mean, where is it is going? How it will pan out at the end of the day?
Well, I think first of all, insofar as Poland is concerned, so we have to basically keep in view the historical relationships as well. As you know, Poland was divided between Germany and Prussia and Russia, and it did not exist for almost like 100 years. So Poland has a viewpoint which is based on history as well, insofar as Russia is concerned, and also, of course, the Second World War and so on and so forth. And there, right from the days when Poland became a part of the European Union, their desire was to get Ukraine included in the European Union. Not so much at that time, they weren't, when I was there, they weren't talking about NATO at that time, but certainly the aspiration was to get the Ukrainians into the European Union. And obviously that ultimately resulted in a split within the European, within Ukraine, East and West. West basically more towards towards Europe and getting involved with the European Union, whereas the East, where you had a great majority of ethnic Russians living over there, they were looking differently. So this basically has a sort of an ethnic and identity bent to it as well within Ukraine. So the question that you've asked is, where is it going to end? I think ultimately the major powers, the big powers, they have to get together and among themselves decide what is going to be the future of Ukraine. It boils down to Russia and to the United States and the West. Unless and until there is some sort of compromise or negotiation between these major powers, I don't see how Zelensky and Ukraine itself will be able to take a different position, because there is a kind of a wavering insofar as the Ukrainian position is concerned. And Russia, I think, is not going to relent. President Putin has probably made a very, very clear choice that he will not allow either Ukraine should become a neutral state, announce it as a neutral state, except the Eastern Ukrainian whatever republics, independent states as independent states, and accept Crimea as a part of Russia. So these are very difficult demands, but I guess a compromise could be possible where there is some sort of a reassurance in whatever form that NATO will not expand, it will not come to Ukraine. I think it is going to be a very messy situation for some time to come. Well, let's hope that the talks between Lavrov and the Ukrainian foreign minister that are going to take place in Turkey, what kind of discussion and possibilities are going to emerge from there. And I think the Turkish president is then going to also brief President Biden. I think the European interests are there insofar as energy is concerned, because their infrastructure, their continued access to Russian gas is important from that point of view. Diversification or alternate means is going to take another 4 or 5 years. So there could be some sort of internal domestic pressure that could build on the governments in Europe, particularly as I think has been said, old Europe and new Europe, their division. I think you can see that France taking a different position,
and then if insurgency in Ukraine gathers momentum, that would also perhaps wield some pressure on Putin, on Russia as well, because they are suffering huge, I think, losses as well. The Russian soldiers, the Russian troops there, and perhaps the West wants Ukraine to become another Afghanistan for Russia, as Afghanistan was for the erstwhile Soviet Union?
So I think it is a rapidly evolving situation. I don't know how much focus there is on the WMD, weapons of mass destruction, in Ukraine, and especially the nuclear weapons and Chernobyl and so on and so forth that Russia has been emphasizing. Then I think also talks about pathogens, the kind of facilities that were producing these biological materials. So this is a very scary picture, and it affects all the countries within the region of Ukraine. I mean, if there is a possibility of these things, how much was it known to President Zelensky? I mean, I am not privy, I can't say that, but nevertheless, I think these reports are emerging, and this brings in another dimension, which can get out of control of everyone. So the prospect of an insurgency in Ukraine is has to be scary for everyone, worrisome for everyone. So hopefully this is going to be one aspect which might induce some sort of softening towards actually big powers talking to each other and thinking about some way out where some sort of a control can be exercised in how these things are handled and managed. So I think this has to be taken into consideration as well. So
Ambassador Abrar Hussain, if I may ask you, how is the present state of bilateral relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan? I mean, we have, I think, because now the OIC Foreign Ministers Conference is taking place in Islamabad on 22nd, 23rd March. So do you think that the response of the OIC countries would be rather encouraging when it comes to raising funds for Afghanistan? How is the situation on the ground?
Well, in the last OIC meeting, there were two major decisions. Number one, to raise funds for Afghanistan to provide humanitarian assistance. And in that, only Saudi Arabia announced 1 billion reals. But then no other announcement came. And perhaps so far, there has been no development in that regard. The second one was that they appointed a special envoy for Afghanistan. And that is working. That special envoy has visited Afghanistan also and met the Afghan leadership. But it's very difficult to predict whether the OIC members who will be here in Islamabad will make any progress towards recognition of the Taliban government. I mean, it's, I'll say, not only that it's too early, but it's also too difficult a decision, because we know within the Muslim countries there are groupings, there are influences of the superpowers, and very few of them in fact think independently. So maybe if some of the countries like Turkey or Iran or Malaysia agree to recognize along with Pakistan, maybe that takes place. And again, I'll say it's another opportunity for these countries to recognize the Taliban government. But let's wait and see.
I think Brigadier Suhail Tirmizi has a question, and after that, I'll have a question for Ambassador Abrar Hussain. Yes, please go ahead, Suhail Tirmizi. आपको अलाउ कर दिया है?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Ji, walaikum assalam.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Ambassador Abrar Saab. Given our border skirmishes with Afghanistan, or if I may be specific, with the Taliban, their non-recognition of the Durand Line, then their internal divisions between the Talibans of the north, then there are the Northern Alliance people, then there is the Haqqani network. How will it benefit Pakistan if it recognizes the Taliban regime in Afghanistan?
Okay, well, let's have a look at all these incidents which are taking place on the border. For example, the efforts from Afghan side to stop Pakistan from putting a fence on the border. So they are opposing this fencing of the border, which Pakistan in any case has done on most of the part of the border. Well, I think these were some individual one or two cases which were highlighted in the media and social media, of course. And this was not, of course, the Taliban government policy. But then this is a very sensitive issue. If some Taliban dissident or someone who is continuing from the previous government in NDS make such an effort to embarrass Taliban government as well as to embarrass Pakistan, because this is such a thing that Taliban can't stand and say that no, they recognize the Pak-Afghan border as international border. There would be opposition from within, and it will take a long time in Afghanistan to convince all people that this is really international border, although de facto it is, and they all believe in it as well. So this was in fact done with an intent to embarrass Taliban government as well. They have very limited, very few options on this. So the only option they had was that they would say that they continue with the Afghan nationalist policy of not recognizing it as international border. Secondly, there were a few skirmishes that took place because on the other side of the border, there are still some militant groups like TTP and other groups who would like to violate the sanctity of border time and again. And Pakistan would have no option but to retaliate. So these things which can be very sensitive in normal circumstances, I will say that they are small things in present circumstances where these things are not the policy of the Taliban government. And if we recognize Taliban government, the benefits that we are going to have is, number one, you will be able to formally have so many agreements with the Afghan government. Those agreements which you were not able to do with the previous governments because there was a very strong Indian lobby which opposed those agreements. For example, Pakistani intelligence agency and Afghan intelligence agency, NDS, were going to have a cooperation agreement. It was even initialed, but then it could not be signed because of the Indian pressure and the Indian lobby influence within Afghanistan. And there are so many other things, like you can discuss water issues with them. You can discuss so many other things which were pending just because of the Indian influence in Afghanistan. So Taliban may not be a pro-Pakistan or Pakistan-friendly government totally, but at the same time, at least it's not a pro-Indian government. Before them, all governments were pro-Indian in one way or another. And this is perhaps the first government which is not pro-Indian. And with we can say that at least it's a neutral government, if not pro-Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Abrar Hussain. Sorry, you have a supplementary question? Okay.
I wanted to thank Ambassador Abrar, but I also have a question for Ambassador Basit Saab. if you may permit me.
Can I just have a question for
Sure.
simply because I think we need, I just wanted to talk a little bit about China also, China's interest in Afghanistan. And also how would you see, it's a very difficult situation, paradoxical. China on the one hand, of course, is worried about certain elements that could destabilize this Western region. So there is, I think, probably more possibility of China and Chinese talking to the Taliban on the security issue. But on the other hand, I think also China would like to see some stability in Afghanistan. So what is the status of engagement between China and Afghanistan at the moment?
This is question from me?
Yes, Ambassador Abrar Hussain, if you could, please.
Well, thank you. As you know, China has remained involved with Taliban even before they're coming to the government.
Yeah.
When they were fighting the foreign troops, even at that time, the Taliban delegations visited China a number of times. And even now, in fact, it's to the Chinese benefit if there is peace in Afghanistan, and Taliban have brought that peace. Because peace in Afghanistan will benefit the whole region, but especially China. The BRI, the CPAC, everything will benefit from peace in China. And at the same time, Chinese have some sensitivities about ETIM. They are afraid that if there is violence in Afghanistan, or if some militant groups are allowed to be based in Afghanistan, then maybe ETIM gets chance again to work from Afghan soil. I mean, this is a fear which is there among Central Asian states, also among Russia as well. Number one, the common fear is Daesh, of course, which is called Islamic State. But at the same time, all countries have their specific fears about some specific militant groups. Like China is afraid about ETIM, Uzbekistan is about Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan about Ansarullah, and so on. And Pakistan about TTP, of course. So those fears are also there. But at the same time, I think China will benefit from peace in Afghanistan, and China would like stability in Afghanistan so that it can benefit economically. And I'll rather say the whole region can benefit economically.
As a matter of fact, I was reading somewhere about a week or fortnight ago, there was a Chinese delegation visiting Afghanistan to carry forward discussions on iron and copper mines, and also how to exploit lithium mines, rare earth, materials in Afghanistan. And the worth of those lithium mines are over $1 trillion. So China understands, and these in Afghanistan, lithium reserves are the second largest after Bolivia. So China understands how Afghanistan can be of tremendous help to them in their future economic growth. And they have been working along these lines for years now. They are committed to spend in copper mines over $3 billion. But they just need, I think, stability and assurances from the Taliban government that whatever investment they do in Afghanistan does not go down the drain. And I hope, as Mr. Ambassador Abrar Hussain very rightly pointed out, you do not have any other option in Afghanistan at the moment. Taliban is the only group which has been able to maintain for the first time peace in the entire country. Last time when they came to power in the 90s, at least, Panjshir Valley was not under their control. But this time round, the entire Afghanistan territory is under their control. So this is, I think, this is a good opportunity for Pakistan to be proactive on the recognition issue. And we should not be, Ukraine is important, no doubt, but Afghanistan is far, far more important for us. And we should be focusing more on Afghanistan rather than on Ukraine. This is how I look at it.
I think Brigadier Sohail Tirmizi has a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. My question is for Ambassador Basit Saab. Sir, what are the challenges which India is likely to face in its foreign policy and economics, given the Ukraine crisis and its relation, the military, technical, and the economic relation and political relations with Moscow, as well as being the strategic partner and very close to the United States-led West at this point in time? Thank you, sir. Please go.
It's an interesting question, and my own assessment is that India, because as I look at it, for the US, its major rival would be China in the decades to come. And India would still be a useful partner for the US in the context of Quad and Asia Pacific, or now as they call it, Indo-Pacific. So I think it would serve their mutual interests. Now, the immediate thing is to watch whether the US imposes sanctions on India under CARSA, countering American adversaries through Sanctions Act. On the issue of S-400, which Russia is supplying to India, if somehow the Biden administration does not impose sanctions, now that Russia has clearly, abstained at the UN Security Council, also at the UNGA, and also at the UN Human Rights Council on resolutions against Russia. So we will see if somehow President Biden fails to impose those CARSA sanctions on India, then we would have a clear idea that US would not like to spoil its strategic partnership with India, at least against China, because China, in any case, is the major rival, major competitor economically as well as strategically in the years to come. So there, I think the US would, the fact that the Quad meeting was held, the virtual meeting the other day, also very much reflects that US is indeed concerned about China's rising power, and they're also worried about Taiwan as well, to a certain extent. So I think we would not see many ruptures in US-India relations. There will be some strains, stresses, but I think the US knows the strategic importance of India in order to counterpoise it against China.
Well, I think on this particular point, the Quad meeting that was held, and despite repeated requests by the United States, India has not really condemned Russian action in Ukraine. So that's is a good pointer in how India's future policy is going to be developed, or perhaps will come under more and more, increasingly under more and more pressure and stress. Also, after the Quad meeting, what has happened is that there was a defense exhibition which was to take place in India. And the Ministry of Defense basically cancelled or postponed the defense exhibition simply because the United States said that we are not going to participate in the expo if the Russian arms are also going to be displayed over there. So it's not really a very easy kind of a situation, like some other countries also. The Asian countries, I think, probably are facing a bit of a problem because there has been a mixed reaction, and also they are in a difficult position to balance between these big powers. So China, of course, remains is one of the main competitors as far as the West is concerned or US is concerned. But China is pursuing a very shrewd foreign policy. So given the way they are handling all these things, I think their focus remains on Taiwan. And Taiwan will continue to be an important, and I think the West knows that they can probably keep on provoking China on that. So, Ambassador Basit, I think what I would like to ask you is that how do you look at the line of actual control conflict between China and India? Because I think repeatedly the questions that are being asked in India is that if we are going to basically give some way to the West insofar as Russia is concerned, that then is US willing to support us against China, our conflict with China? So how do you see these demands, and how do you see the line of actual control conflict?
I don't think that we can expect resolution of this long pending problem in the foreseeable future. Several rounds have been held between the special representatives of the two countries, but to no avail. This problem will continue, and hence I can't see China, India mending their relations. I mean, they do have trade, no doubt about that, but that the lack of mutual trust will remain there. And this is where the US strategic India partnership becomes very, very relevant and valid. My own feeling is that that's why we have seen last year skirmishes in the eastern Ladakh region. And these skirmishes will continue because India cannot give up its claims, nor can China along the actual line of control. And then it is also, in some areas, Shaksgam Valley and in these areas, Pakistan also becomes a party. So it's a very complex issue. These tensions will continue. And as India continues to move towards the US, we will see more and more skirmishes along the line of actual control between China and India. But India would try to put it on the back burner. But China, I think, will continue making some moves along the line of actual control to keep reminding India that the two countries do have a serious problem, and these problems need to be resolved. But India, I think, under the BJP in particular, I do not think that they are in a position to give any ground to China. So this problem will continue in the foreseeable future, and that provides the US space to penetrate or to further augment its strategic partnership with India. So it will remain like this for years to come, in my view.
But of course, India is also playing an active role, a partner in other institutions that have been created, such as SCO, and now I think China talking about BRICS. But we'll see how the future developments are going to take place. We have not had the pleasure of listening to Ambassador Khalid Masood. For some reason, he was not getting connected. So the discussion on China, I think, would have been more meaningful if he had been there with us. But of course, the interventions that have been made by Ambassador Abrar Hussain on such an important issue as Afghanistan, and his views expressed on the developments that are likely to take place and regional connectivity along the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, all those, and China and the terrorist destructive elements in Afghanistan. I think these are very relevant and important questions. So I thank you, Ambassador Abrar Hussain, for being with us and for your intervention. And of course, Ambassador Abdul Basit is an experienced hand on India and the region as well. And he understands the international politics as also. So your I think interventions and discussion that followed after that has been very useful and fruitful. One hopes that that we will be able to in the future organize not a webinar. I think somehow it doesn't work, probably a seminar on similar kind of an issues in the future. But of course, Ambassador Brigadier Suhail Tirmizi, I think you have faced a lot of problems in getting us tech savvy and giving me at least some experience of how to use the Microsoft Team and so on and so forth. In the future, I think probably we'll have a better way of getting connected. I think but of course, Mr. Saqib and others, and Kaisar Nawab, and of course Momina, the two. Their support has been extremely helpful insofar as I'm concerned, so I'm grateful to them also. We have recorded this, and I think we will be sharing the recording, and probably Momina is going to draft a report on this. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.